In 1991, Martin Scorsese's crime drama Goodfellas was nominated for 6 Oscars and won only one of them, Joe Pesci as Best Supporting Actor. I'd imagine at this point that most people who know anything about movies would agree that Goodfellas is a stone-cold classic, but as its lack of Oscar wins prove, it wasn't always that way. At the time of its release, the movie had the most swearing of any film in history, 300 of the F word alone. The cursing was so frequent, in fact, and the movie so violent that when Warner Brothers did preview screenings, Goodfellas received the worst response in the studio's history. The numbers were so low, it was funny, said Scorsese. But the truth is, to judge any film based on how many times someone uses a word that sounds like duck, or how many times they hit someone round the head with a hammer, is foolish. That's especially so in the case of Goodfellas, which in my opinion is one of the best films ever made. It is a Shakespearean tragedy of murder and betrayal, a lesson for life teaching that not everything is as it seems, and a sure statement that cinema is perhaps the best way we've ever had to tell a story. The movie's based on a book by a real-life mobster and tells the tale of Henry Hill, played by Ray Liotta, a young man who grows up admiring the gangsters in his New York City neighbourhood in the 1950s. Eager to join their world, he begins doing jobs for local crime boss Paulie Cicero, eventually getting recruited into the Lucchese crime family. Under the mentorship of the violent Jimmy Conway, Robert De Niro, Henry comes to enjoy the life of a gangster, the easy money, the cars, the women. But soon he, Jimmy, and their new friend Tommy DeVito, played by Joe Pesci, start to defy Paulie's strict crime rules, moving into the drugs trade with as much subtlety as an elephant in a china shop. Their misdeeds quickly catch up with them, and rapidly all their plans start to unravel. But with his friends and enemies closing in, can Henry and his family get out of the life and live to grease up that hairdo another day? If there's one thing that sets Goodfellas above pretty much every other movie out there, it's the brilliant characters. The film is stuffed with them, from Henry, bubbling with energy and ambition, to his friends Jimmy, the steely-eyed leader of the main trio, and Tommy, a firecracker never more than a moment from violence. But it's not just the big roles. Even those with only 5 minutes of screen time excel, like Maury Kessler, the owner of a wig shop whose own toupee has more life in it than a yapping terrier, and Billy Batts, whose single scene in the film is as icy as the Antarctic. But it's the big three who shine, particularly De Niro and Pesci, although that's no shade at all to Ray Liotta, who kindly said of the film, De Niro and Pesci were the glitter and I was the glue, underselling his own role. You can argue back and forth on whether Raging Bull, Taxi Driver or The Good Father is De Niro's best performance, but for me it's Goodfellas. Apparently Al Pacino was considered for the role, and while Pacino would of course have been magnificent, as he would be in anything, even an advert for toothpaste, De Niro absolutely owns his character. He's terrifying as Jimmy, his cold fury barely bubbling away under the surface of his skin. There are scenes where he doesn't say a word and yet communicates death with just his eyes. But it's Pesci who steals the show, and he was well worth his Best Supporting Oscar. If you ask anyone which scenes they remember from Goodfellas, it'll likely be the ones with Pesci in them. Pesci is perfect in this film, frightening with his capricious violence. The kind of man you'd meet on the street and lose your eye just for glancing at him. It's a career-defining performance that makes it all the odder that he bowed out of acting less than a decade later, appearing in only a handful of films after that, which is still more than the comically low number of words he used in his Oscar acceptance speech.
Oh, it's my privilege, thank you.
It wouldn't be much of a review of a Scorsese movie if we didn't talk about the directing, and the man is magnificent as usual. He said he wanted to begin Goodfellas like a gunshot and have it get faster from there, and his aim was bang on. The movie never stops moving, with sharp editing and cameras that track, swoop and sweep, reflecting the characters' frantic lifestyles. Goodfellas is a funny film too, like a lot of Scorsese's when they're not being tense or violent, and the soundtrack is phenomenal. But it's the set design and costumes I'd like to call out the most here. The film really brings the 50s, 60s, 70s back to life, with old cars littering the streets, bright colourful clothing and that horrible brown decor that the movie Maverick still remembers from when he was a kid. Scorsese was involved with every detail of the cast's wardrobe, to the degree that he fixed Ray Liotta's tie himself to be sure it was spot on. It's attention to detail like this that makes an audience love a movie's design, and all without a lick of CGI in sight. There aren't many negatives with a film as good as this. There's a reason Goodfellas has topped many greatest films of all times lists. But if you were really sticking a gun to my head asking me for faults, I'd have to say the usual. 3-act films often struggle with a saggy middle, and Goodfellas, whilst doing better than most, is no different. The actress who plays Henry Hill's wife in the film, Lorraine Bracco, seems to have been so hell-bent on not getting lost in this cast of behemoths that she sometimes drifts into overacting. I've heard enough of her groaning screams to last me a lifetime. But even these nitpicks can be forgiven in the context of what's brilliant about Goodfellas. If a movie is a collection of scenes put together into sequences meant to entertain and provoke thought, there are few better examples. It's a tragic story of the American dream and how that can be perverted and inverted. The violence and the profanity brings this to life, asking the audience how much they can sympathise with people who, on the surface, are awful, all while keeping that same audience on the edge of their seats and their fingernails bitten to the quick. There's a scene towards the end of Goodfellas, a murderous montage set to Eric Clapton's Layla that's breathtaking. It's violent, graphic, and yet it floats along like a symphony. It's a testament to Scorsese and Warner Brothers that they ignored those negative test audiences back in the early 90s. Had the movie come out today, I suspect that Layla scene, like the rest of the movie, would have been chopped up, reined in, its edges smoothed over. 5 F words and no more. Just think what we would have lost. Anyway, nothing more to say. This is Movie Maverick signing out.